Hey guys, it's Ator. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to ask you something. What's your story? We all have one, and sometimes it takes the right space and a little guidance to bring that story to life. That's why I created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. It's a unique space for men to explore their identities, reflect on personal experiences, and use writing as a tool for self-discovery. Whether you're an experienced writer or have never written a word, this workshop is for you. Join me and other like-minded men on this journey. Visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more. Thanks. And now on to today's episode. When was the last time you had a really good cry? What's that? You say men don't cry? You might be right. And that's not a good thing. Today, our guest is a mental health professional who's dedicated to helping men navigate their emotions and show up authentically in their relationships. His name is Ryan Kopyar, and he's here to share his wisdom and experience. In a world where men are often taught to suppress their emotions and man up, Ryan is here to challenge that narrative. He's going to talk about why it's okay for men to feel, to cry, and to be vulnerable. And more importantly, he'll explain how doing so can lead to healthier, more fulfilling relationships and a more balanced life. Ryan's new book, Big Boys Do Cry, is a guide for men to navigate their emotions. Today, he's going to give us a window into his journey and share some practical tips that you can start using right away. Whether you're dealing with stress or just want to connect more deeply with the people you love, this conversation is for you. Ryan's insights can help you find strength in vulnerability and open up new pathways to emotional freedom. So let's get on the road. Welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast.
We started this podcast to share our stories and hear from others about their adventures in men's work.
Join us on the journey to our fully authentic selves, emotional healing, and the meaning of modern masculinity.
Here on Authenticity Road.
Hello, and welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast. I am Ator, and this week on the show, we are delighted to welcome Ryan Kopyar to the show. Ryan is a mental health professional with a diverse background in holistic healing, counseling, and hypnotherapy. He is dedicated to fostering physical, mental, and emotional balance. Ryan's philosophy draws parallels between physical and mental flexibility, emphasizing the importance of overcoming past experiences to envision a brighter future. Ryan is the author of Big Boys Do Cry, a man's guide to navigating emotions and showing up more vulnerable in relationships. And that's what he is here today to discuss. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ator. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be with you, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Yeah, my pleasure. So what did I leave out in that introduction? What else would you like folks to know about you?
Well, he's got a beautiful head of hair. That would be the one part that you were missing. So for anybody,
well, we can go to your website
and see that out. No, that was very generous. You know, I tell people be a soul, not a role, right? So I focus on being of service to others and helping people. I help men and women, but in my work as a counselor, that seems to more often be men. And so a lot of the work that I do is with men and serve them and help them to be able to better identify their thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and help them to improve how they show up in their relationships with those that they love.
Awesome. We're here today to talk about your new book, Big Boys Do Cry. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little background on how did that develop? I know that when you read the book, you tell your story pretty well about how you got to where you are, which is awesome. But I'm wondering if you could just sort of give the Cliff Notes version for the listeners.
Sure. So, you know, in the mental health field that I work in, there is unfortunately, very, very high level of demand for people that are looking for clinical mental health counseling services. And really, just in the world that we live in today with so many people in pain, there is a large need for somebody to be able to help to facilitate healing for them. And there's only so many hours in the day for me as well as the other mental health professionals. And so I would have so many men reaching out, and so often in the work that I would do with men where it was the same or very parallel or overlapping information. And it would be surrounded a lot with, I feel angry, I feel unseen, I feel unheard, I feel underappreciated. I'm struggling. It was a big struggle to even get to identifying that that's what it was that they were really feeling. And then just very often feeling completely lost as to how to express that in an emotionally regulated way and in a way with their partner or their spouse or their family to get those needs met. And so I said, okay, I got to figure out a way that I can quantify this, make it easily digestible, and be able to share it with the masses, because I only have so much time to do it in one-on-one work. So that's a long answer to a short question, I guess.
Well, it wasn't that long of an answer. It was exactly the right length that it needed to be to say what you needed to say. What I found interesting in the book was you talking about your journey and how you learned the things that you learned about embracing your emotions and not holding them down and things like that. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, the things you learned growing up and how those were not quite right and how you learned to overcome all of that.
Yeah. So in the book, I speak, initially about my counseling journey. And I guess kind of the preface before that, which is in the other book that I published, my first book I published in 2019, Unlock the Power of Your Mind. I speak about the death of my mother and my unborn sister. She was raped and killed when she was 8 months pregnant with my sister. And it was a very tragic death. For almost 30 years, I didn't cry. For almost 30 years, I did not process the death of my mother and sister. And it was in a very serious car accident that I was in 2018 that finally led me to seek counseling for the PTSD that I had from the accident. What I found out was it was not only the PTSD from the car accident, it was the PTSD from the little 3-year-old boy whose mother never came home. And so once I started in with that journey of my healing through my incredible counselor, Billy Mercedes, I started to cry and I started to realize, hey, wow, this is really freeing. And as I start to get in touch with my emotions, I'm showing up in relationships better. I was still a far away from what I would say healthy, but better. And then later on in my counseling journey and my own healing journey, I started to understand, okay, well, where did I learn this? And in counseling, we call it family of origin. I guess another way to phrase that is, hey, what did we learn growing up? What I say is, if you didn't grow up in a household speaking Spanish, as an adult, would you be upset that you don't know how to speak Spanish? No,
of course not. Yeah.
You didn't grow up learning it, right? So I looked at my family of origin and, my grandfather and my father, there wasn't a lot of crying. There wasn't a lot of displays of emotion. And there certainly was not a lot of conversations around those topics. And so from that side of the family, I realized, okay, there was a lot I didn't learn. My papa, who I was so very close with growing up until he passed away when I was an adolescent, he did cry and he did have a larger than life personality. And when he walked into a room, you knew it. You knew he was there. And so I kind of saw that contrast and I thought, okay, where is it that I want to be and how do I want to show up in that healthy and emotionally regulated way?
Yeah. And it sounds as if your dad never really dealt with the death of your mom in a functional way. And he never really came to terms with that and let go of that pain. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't want to speak for my father because I'm not him and I don't understand, where he is at mentally or emotionally. I will say this. It took me almost 3 decades to start the process. And I know the level of dysfunction that I went through, both consciously and subconsciously. I mean, I can see now, right? Looking back, right? Both the conscious and subconscious ways that I was numbing that pain with drugs and alcohol and getting lost in my work and everything like that. So it takes a lot of courage to go on the healing journey. And maybe not everybody is ready to do it. Maybe they're not ready to do it now. That's okay. It's everybody's own path to walk. The message that I want to get through to the listeners and to the viewers is to say, I promise you it's worth it. Challenging? Yes. Worth it? Oh, heck yes.
Yeah. But to go back to your point about family of origin, you didn't see this stuff modeled at all. And with your one grandpop you did, but otherwise you didn't really see this stuff modeled at all. And so one of the things I like on your website is that you say there is no pushing feelings aside. There is only pushing them inside. There's only pushing them down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that for a minute.
Mm-hmm. I see this with both men and women, but I really see this with men where it's like, hey, I've got to compartmentalize this right now because I got stuff to do. And it's very often in the sense of either leadership within the family or pressures as it relates to being able to go to work to provide financial support for the family. And so it's just, I don't have time to deal with that. Let me just push it aside. And, in some micro way, we could push something aside for a very short period of time. If I'm having a bad day or there's an intense disagreement with my spouse and then I've got to go to work, okay, maybe I want to compartmentalize that and push it aside, table it just for 8 hours until I get back from work, but then I want to dive back into that conversation. So that kind of compartmentalizing can be healthy, right? But very often what I would see with men and what I did myself is, well, let me just push it aside, push it aside, push it aside. What I came to realize is there's no pushing it aside. It's only pushing it inside. And the more we push it inside and stuff it down and keep it down, the more it creates internal chaos inside of ourselves. This is often happening at a subconscious level where we don't even realize that this is all being bottled up inside. Now, what happens if this starts to go on for extended periods of time is it becomes really difficult to be able to identify our thoughts, feelings, and emotions because we got so much stuff stuffed down that we don't even realize, hey, is this what I'm feeling in the moment? Is this what I'm feeling from last week? Is this what I'm feeling from when I was 10 years old? I mean, for however long we've been stuffing it down and not releasing it is for however long it's going to be in there. So it becomes very challenging to be able to identify it when that much gets stuffed down. So that's why I say there's no pushing it aside. There's only pushing it deeper inside.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's get some men crying. How do we do that?
Great question. I think having it modeled for us is important. And having community of men where we can get together. So any of the men that are listening to this right now, my name is Ryan Joseph Kopyar. I'm 38 years old. I'm 225 pounds and bald. If you looked at me from the outside, you think, man, that's a super tough kind of alpha male guy, right? I cry, guys. I cry. I cry when I'm sad. I cry when I'm happy. And I love to cry. I'm not saying go out there and just start crying all over the place, right? But yes, when I gave myself permission to cry, my entire life changed. And so I would encourage somebody to have a conversation with other friends that maybe are a little bit more emotionally in tune with themselves and can help you to feel more comfortable to cry, right? Get a copy of the book, take a look at some of the YouTube videos that I posted. Work with a counselor. Very often there's a blockage inside of us that is preventing us from being able to cry. So yes, it's about being in an environment where we feel safe to cry, but it's also about giving ourselves permission to cry. And in order to give ourselves permission to cry, we've got to figure out whatever that either conscious or subconscious, emotional or mental block is that's preventing us from getting out of our head and into our heart.
Yeah. What are some of the common blockages that you see men fighting?
Past trauma. For me, I'll speak to my own experience. For me, it was the death of my mother and sister. So that little 3-year-old boy who, it was a couple days after Christmas and a week and a half before my third birthday. That little boy's mom and sister never came home. You imagine how challenging that must have been for that little boy, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that little boy was trapped inside of me. In clinical work, we call it parts therapy, internal family system parts therapy. I didn't realize that little boy was stuck. He was stuck. He was feeling unsafe. He was feeling unseen and unheard and not knowing that things were going to be okay. So we had to go through life living this very stoic alpha male, not going to feel safe to create deep levels of connection, abandonment issues, all of that, because there was a blockage inside of that past trauma. So very, very often it's past trauma. And I see it either in the work that I do with men and women, it's from past childhood. And I see it very often in the work that I do with men as police officers, first responders, military individuals that have served in the military. These are other big trauma blockages that happen later in life. And by the way, if we develop PTSD later in life, it is very, very likely that the strong chance that we developed it was because there was also trauma from our childhood. So if we have, I guess another way to say that is, if you've got trauma in your childhood and you have undiagnosed or untreated PTSD, it is all the more likely that you're going to develop PTSD later in life.
It's interesting that you mentioned these hypermasculine systems, police, military, things like that. Do you think that, let me rephrase the question. What do you think is the source of the blockage when it comes to those hypermasculine systems? Is it that there is a cultural predisposition inside those systems that says you're not supposed to feel? Or is it that these people deal with traumatic events on such a regular basis that they end up having post-traumatic stress?
Both, especially in Western culture. When we think about what it means to be a man based in Western culture, right? It is, Arnold Schwarzenegger with the cigar in his mouth and the machine gun, right? You look at the 80s, and I don't know if it's really shifted all that much since then as it relates to, okay, big, strong, powerful, tough, stoic, being seen crying is a big sign of vulnerability. And here's the other thing, okay? For all you men out there, did you ever have a situation growing up where your father or your grandfather or whoever your caretakers were, did they ever say to you, "Oh my gosh, Johnny, I just had such a great cry. Let me tell you all about it. Let me tell you what came up for me, Johnny"? No, it never happened, right? So if we weren't ever taught that it was okay, going all the way back to the men in our life who we very often admire, not always, but often, those are our initial role models. If they never demonstrated that for us, how are we ever going to learn it? And not only that, right, but if what they did model for us was stoic, don't cry, more emotionally guarded and shut down. Well, that's what we're exposed to. So I think a large part of it is Western culture, but generationally passed down. So that's part of it. And then clinically speaking, the more that we're exposed, okay, so there's traumatic event and there's trauma. Traumatic event is the external experience. Trauma is the internal imperience, imperience, right? So, of course, if we're exposed to the trauma at an external level more often, the traumatic event more often, it's just a numbers game that we're going to be more susceptible to develop the imperience of trauma. Now, think about this, kind of to expand on your question. Think about if we've got unrecognized, stored subconscious trauma from childhood, and then we start to wear what I call in the book the mask of the stoic tough guy and we're not taking the mask off, and then we put ourselves in an environment with repeated exposure to traumatic events and law enforcement, firefighters, military, first responders, oh boy, now we've got just the recipe for a PTSD diagnosis.
Yeah, definitely. You subtitle your book, A Man's Guide to Navigating Emotions and Showing Up More Vulnerable in Relationships. And since it's a guide, there are going to be tools and tips and tricks. So what are some of the ways that men can begin to show up in this more vulnerable way?
Yeah. The first thing comes back to giving yourself permission to know that it's okay. To all you guys out there, right? Know that it's okay to cry. Know that it is okay to not be perfect. Know that it is okay to take off this mask. Your wife, your spouse, your partner, your girlfriend, your fiance. When we take off the mask, when we get out of our head and get into our heart, it facilitates so much deeper levels of communication. And through deeper levels of communication comes more connection. So allow yourself to be vulnerable. Give yourself permission to take off the mask. And working with a counselor, working with a therapist, working with somebody from your church or faith community where you can feel safe to take off that mask, right? Take it off. Take it. I can't tell you how many, I've worked with some military individuals with some high levels of exposure to life or death situations at a very high stake scale. Okay. And man, within a couple of sessions, and sometimes within the first session, but usually not so much, because usually I need to develop and build that relationship with them first. But typically within 3 to 4 sessions, when they give themselves permission and they feel safe, they're crying, man. They're crying. And then it's like the game changes, because now you gave yourself permission to cry. And so now you can start to show up that way in your relationships. So give yourself, here's the biggest tip, give yourself permission to cry and allow yourself to cry and be okay with that. Tell yourself that that's okay. Then once you feel comfortable, so to speak, with that, then start to translate that into your other relationships. Because when we're vulnerable and when we say, hey, I don't have this thing all figured out. Hey, it's what I talk about, the concept of emotional flexibility. To say, hey, I don't have this thing figured out and I could use some help and I could use your grace. Guys, your partner wants to hear that. They're begging for you to hear that. But Western culture programming says, no, that's not safe. You can't ask somebody else for help. So, give yourself permission to cry, be emotionally flexible where you can say, I'm not perfect and I could use your grace and I could use your support and I could use your help. And here's the areas that I'm looking to improve on. Okay. Communicating in that way with those that you love, that's going to help them to feel safe. And when we have safety, we have communication. When we have communication, we have connection. And when we have connection, now we can really start to build deeper levels of love.
Yeah, definitely. So what's so special about crying? Who cares if I can cry or I can't?
As human beings, we cry even within the womb. And I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I won't step outside my clinical scope of practice. But, scientific literature shows that we're, as human beings, we're crying in the womb. Sign of a healthy baby after it's born is that it's going to be crying. So what would make us think that something that God or our higher power or whoever it is that you believe in, right? Okay. We were created with that ability to cry within the womb. Obviously, it's pretty important for us to be able to do as human beings. So I think that's kind of the very surface level, non-scientific explanation of, hey, if we could do it then, and it's a sign of a healthy baby, I think it's probably something we want to continue to do appropriately, right, throughout the rest of our life. So that's number one. Number two, at an emotional level, crying, I believe, is a release of energy. And it can be a release of non-serving energy, sadness, grief, depression, feelings of overwhelm. Okay, so it can be that. Also could be tears of joy. And that's also a beautiful expression and a beautiful release of more positive emotions. So I believe that energy is emotions. And those emotions that are stored inside of us need to come out, and they need to come out in a healthy and an emotionally regulated way. It's easy to do that with happiness. It's easy to do that with love. Not so easy to do with depression, anger, frustration, unseen, unheard, unloved, uncared about. And so crying allows those emotions to come up, allows that energy to come out so that we can put it out on the table, make sense of it, see what's ours, see what's old programming, and figure out how do we communicate these feelings now in a healthy way with those that we love.
Yeah. I asked the question as a devil's advocate, not because I don't know the answer. I happen to be a big proponent of crying. I love crying, actually, appropriately, when it's right. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend. Well, actually, I had the conversation twice, once today and once last week with two different people, saying how I haven't cried in months. And I would love a really good cry right now. Like, I would just love to dive in and settle in and just have a really great, big, cathartic cry. And I'm not finding it. It's just not happening for me. And I'm not worried about it. The next time it's important for me to cry, I'm sure I'll be able to. But in the meantime, I have such good associations with the release I get from crying that I would just love to be able to have one right now. And so, I identify with everything that you just said. I know that we've talked about having men connect with mental health professionals to sort of work through this. But what are some of the things that men can do on their own to begin to open up, to begin to become more vulnerable, begin to give themselves permission to, I don't want to say be more open or more soft, but to reach these sort of levels of openness that we're talking about here, where it's okay to cry, where it's okay to communicate and be vulnerable? What are some things guys can do on their own?
Okay, that's a great question. And, I don't want to push back here or seem biased, and I know that I am as a counselor. It took me my counseling session with Billy Mercedes, because the pain was so deep. It was buried so deep inside at the subconscious level. I couldn't access it without the help of a professional. We even did some guided meditation hypnotherapy, which is part of what got me so into doing hypnotherapy. I don't do it. I do kind of a hybrid combination of guided meditation, kind of internal parts work, and hypnotherapy combined in together. So if it's stored very, very deep subconsciously, you're just not going to be able to get to it. I shouldn't say you're not going to be able to. It is highly unlikely to be able to get into it without the help of a trained professional. So if it's a lot of deep trauma and some deep rooted stuff, I want to highly encourage you to go seek a professional help to get into that, because it can bring up a lot of stuff that may be very overwhelming. And it would not be probably prudent to embark on that journey without the help of a professional. So that's part of the ethical professional response that I have to have as a counselor to that question. Now, if you've already kind of done that work, or maybe the trauma isn't so deep, right? Here's some other things that work for me. I like to put my headphones on, listen to music, and it could vary. I could listen to some old school, Led Zeppelin. I could listen to some music of faith. I could listen to meditation type music with some Tibetan bowls. It just depends on whatever mood that I'm in. And I'll just get really, really quiet, and I'll hug myself, and I'll speak to myself. and I'll reflect on, hey, what are some of the things that I was upset about today or over the week or whatever the case may be. I like to do it after times where I felt triggered or I felt emotionally dysregulated. And I'll speak to that. Whatever part of me was feeling dysregulated or unseen or unheard or unloved or whatever the case may be. And that typically, when I start to speak to myself in a loving way, that will usually bring up to the surface whatever it is that needs to come out. And so sometimes that will be tears. Sometimes it may be kind of just a dry yell or, whatever the case may be. But that would be the actionable strategy. I would say the other thing is having that one really good friend, those one or two really good friends that hopefully we all have, and just saying, all right, no judgment, bro. This is just you and me having a conversation. Like, let's just talk raw and real, and holding space for each other, meaning it's not going back and forth like the conversation that we're having. It's the other person doing 90% of the talking or 95% of the talking, and the other person doing 90 or 95% of the listening. Because we live in a world today where it's so fast paced and everybody wants to, well, let me tell you this, well, let me tell you that, right? And we don't hold space for each other. So, maybe you have a conversation with a friend. Hey, today I'll be the listener. Next week, you be the listener. I'm here to hold space for you, man. Just let it out.
Yeah. When it comes to this topic, and when it comes to the things that you guide your clients through and the things you've written about, what is it that guys don't know that you wish they knew?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Ator again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important it is to take time for self-reflection and growth. That's exactly why I've created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. This is a 6-session online workshop designed specifically for men. Whether you're looking to explore your identity, challenge societal expectations, or simply find a creative outlet to process your life, this workshop gives you the space to do that. It's not about being a professional writer. It's about telling your story, digging deep, and connecting with others on the same journey. Each session is filled with prompts and discussions that will help you understand yourself better, all in a supportive and open environment. So if you want a way to write, reflect, and share, join me for Ink and Authenticity. Just visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more and register. Now, let's get back to the show.
Specific around the topic of crying or emotions, or what? Could you give me some more context there?
Well, sure. I'm thinking about emotional lives in general, but I'm also thinking that applies kind of equally to this notion of crying, and to being vulnerable. I think that in our culture, men are not given the broad palette of emotions to paint with. Mm-hmm. And I believe that a lot of guys are walking through life sleepwalking, that they just need to have an alarm clock put next to their ear and wake up so that they can hear what we're trying to say. And so in the context of, think of the men who are walking around as kind of emotional zombies. Mm-hmm. What do you wish they know? What do you wish they knew that they obviously don't know? Okay.
Well, all right. Could I answer this? I could answer this question in a few different contexts. Well, I'll start here and then
you answer it however makes you happy.
Okay.
Because that's where the magic is.
I wish that I could go back to the cocky 20-year-old version of me that was walking down the halls at the University of Scranton, okay, who thought he was so macho and tough. And I wish I could tell him, dude, you think you're tough? You have no idea. You think you're powerful? You have no idea how much more powerful you could be if you gave yourself permission to cry. You have no idea how much more connection you could get with people if you healed that trauma that you're carrying around inside. Now, if you said that, if somebody came and said that to that 20-year-old version of me, I was far too arrogant and ignorant and filled with my own ego to ever be able to receive that. So I think therein lies the challenge in many respects, right? We're often very ignorant. And so it often takes like that rock bottom moment to get us to open up, right? Get us to be willing to hear or to listen. So I think that that's to some extent. But here's the biggest thing that I would say, just to answer your question in a more general sense. If you think it makes you powerful to be strong and to not cry and to be stoic and to wear this mask all the time, if you think that's what makes you powerful, that's somebody that's very much in their divine masculine. Dude, you're missing out on the other 50% of the energy of this world, which is the divine feminine, which is the heart, which is getting in touch with emotions, which is being able to hold space for people. So if you think you're strong now, dude, you're only operating at 50% of your strength.
Yeah. Going back to something we touched on earlier, but it also applies here, is that I happen to believe that vulnerability is strength, that we come at vulnerability from a position of power, because we can't be vulnerable if we're not strong. Right? When do we enter the field of battle with our chest exposed? When we're feeling strong.
Yeah.
It's when we're feeling weak that we're curled into a ball and protecting ourselves. And so, yes, definitely, these guys are only operating at 50% because they're not embracing.
So I speak about it in the book in the beginning without getting too, kind of midway through the book, but I mention it, right? But then I save the last chapter where I really go into the more, what some people would call esoteric. For me, it's very concrete in my belief of how I approach the world. But we could conceptualize it like this. The divine masculine is the strength. It is the energy of leadership. It is the energy of structure. It is the energy of let's get things done. And the divine feminine is more of the energy of creativity and holding space and love and nurturing. Okay. And so, if we look at it even from a biological perspective, the man is the strength that enters into the woman, which receives. And there's a whole host of other ways that we can break down the divine masculine and the divine feminine, but that's kind of the concept of which I look at it. What I try to do is break it down in an applicable way that kind of the everyday guy can get without getting too spiritual or esoteric into things. Although if this was a different podcast or a different topic of conversation, we could have a whole other conversation about that. But I try to keep it kind of easily digestible for people without getting too kind of quote unquote woo-woo.
Yeah. I have heard you mention prayer and spirituality and those kind of things several times in our conversation together today. And I'm curious how those notions of a higher power or spirituality or woo-woo, as you called it, play into this work.
Yeah. I don't think it's woo-woo. Other people identify it as woo-woo. And so I say that kind of proactively to ease people, right? It's like, hey, listen, and listen, to be vulnerable with you, 8 years ago, if you brought this conversation to me of divine masculine and divine feminine, right? I would have said, get the hell out of here. What are you talking about? So I always try and operate from the perspective of, and as a counselor, I have to honor whoever it is that I'm sitting across. And I don't like to use the word client. Whoever it is that I'm sitting across, I work for them, I serve them, and I help them. And I help them through the context of their lens, not through my lens. And so very often I will brush broad strokes about topics in such a way to see, like, okay, is this something that we can talk about? Is this a framework through which we can see things? If we can, awesome. If we can't, that's okay too. We'll just come at it from a little bit of a different way, maybe.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I got off track there. Can you repeat the question again?
How do notions of spirituality or a higher power or things of that nature inform this work from your perspective?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So whether we invite a higher power, source, God, Allah, Brahma, the great creator, the great I am, however we want to identify that higher power, we don't have to invite it into healing consciously, but I have literally seen and felt, not only in my own life and in the life of my friends, but also in the work that I do, it just feels different. It's just magical. I wish I could describe it, but I can't. It is just a feeling. I'll get goosebumps. And there's just like this sense of surrender. It's like, hey, I can't figure this thing out on my own. I need the help of something greater than me. And so if there's an individual that I'm working with and we can look at it through that framework, I think number one, it helps to take pressure off both of us because we know, okay, there is something far greater than us that's here with us helping to facilitate this healing. So that's how I frame it is, okay, if the individual is open to it, great, let's bring it in. Let's bring their faith in, whatever that may be, capital R religion or our relationship with God, whatever the context of it may be. And then let's frame it around, hey, there's a higher power that is just wanting and looking to be invoked into the healing process. And if we allow that and connect to it, oh my gosh, it becomes incredible, the healing that can happen.
Thanks for going there. I don't want to take you out of your comfort zone, but I was curious after you had mentioned it several times. I was curious where you stood. So I know that you have only a limited time to spend with us today, and I don't want to run out of time. So before we get too much further, listeners of the show know that there are two questions I ask every guest on the show. And since you are in the hot seat, it is now your turn.
Okay.
The name of the show is the Authenticity Road Podcast. And so question number one is, what does the word authenticity mean to you?
Showing up unapologetically myself as humble and confident.
Showing up as unapologetically myself as humble and confident.
Yeah. While maintaining my humbleness and confidence, right? I think being humble is important, but I also think that if we want to be an influencer, if we want to be a leader, if we want to be a change maker, you got to have confidence because you are going to get pushback, you're going to get friction. And if you're not being authentic in that confidence, it's going to erode pretty quickly. So being authentic means, hey, this is who I am. These are what my beliefs are. I am flexible in my belief system, but strong to my moral principles. And, there's going to be some things that I'm going to say that may rub you the wrong way. And that's okay. We can agree to disagree, but I'm going to show up unapologetically as myself while also, not being a jerk about it, right? But being humble and confident in my beliefs. If you're not confident in your beliefs, then how are you ever going to get somebody to get them to adapt or adopt yours, right? It's probably going to be pretty tricky. The world struggles with finding their own things that we believe in as individuals, right? So much programming from the outside world. So to be authentic is like, yeah, this is me, and I'm okay if it goes against the grain.
Beautiful. Thanks. And I would add that for me, to my way of thinking, humility and confidence are not necessarily contradictory. It is perfectly plausible to be both humble and confident. This is not going to sound humble, but I like to think that I split the difference there. I think that I managed to maintain my humility while moving forward with confidence. question number 2 is your chance to freestyle. And that is, what do you wish that I had asked you? Or what line of questioning do you wish had been opened up, or topic had been opened up that I didn't ask you, or that didn't get opened up, that you wish we had talked about?
Well, I think that you asked me a number of wide range of different questions. I think it would be helpful to maybe talk about, for me to be vulnerable as it relates to my own journey with healing as it relates to the impact that it had in my relationships. That's something that I speak about in the book, which I think is important. And that's understanding of, some of these concepts are great for an individual, but then so how's this going to help me in my relationship? How's this going to, Ryan, I'm on the verge of divorce. Ryan, I do not have a good relationship with my 16-year-old daughter, and this is tearing me up inside. I just had a conversation with a gentleman the other day. He's struggling with his son. And, it's like, dude, I could just see he was crushed, right? And so to let, the men and women out there know, like, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to share about these things and talk about these things, and to understand that when you can start to work on these things and grow in these areas, it can have a tremendous impact with those that you love.
Yeah. What are you feeling passionate about these days?
The work that I do, helping men to cry. Yeah, I with the help of my editor, I wrote this book in about 3 months, and it's not because I'm super smart, and it's not because I'm a fantastic writer. It's because I just felt that this information was just flowing through me, that it needed to get out to help the men, to help the divine masculine in the world right now. No, guys, it's important to get out of our heads and into our hearts, because the divine feminine is starting to get out of their hearts and find their power in their voice. And we can't have the divine feminine getting into their power, right? Because, let me rephrase that. There's going to be a vibrational mismatch if we've got both people in the power, right? So we got to figure out that harmony where we can complement each other, right? Kind of like a Tetris almost, where it's like, okay, women have been suppressed for a very long period of time, and their power has been taken away. I see that in such a major way that they're stepping into finding their voice, and they're stepping in to find their power. Men got to get out of their head and into their heart so that they can start to express and speak from their heart, so that they can get their needs met. Because just staying in the head and just wearing the mask and just pretending like the emotional needs don't need to be met is not good. It's not healthy. And so that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about being that bridge builder and helping to help those Tetris pieces fit together, particularly as it relates to working with the men to get out of their head and into their heart.
Awesome. Love that answer. And now I'm going to ask you the single most important question that I have asked you the entire interview. And that is, where do people find you if they want to learn more or find out more about your book?
Oh, thank you so much. So they can go to my website, www.ryankopyarholistichealing.com. My last name is spelled Kopyar. So ryankopyarholistichealing.com. They can get a copy of my book. I have a men's 8-week vulnerability masterclass program that they can join as well on the website. And if you live in either the province of British Columbia, Washington, or Oregon in the United States of America, and you feel like I might be a good fit for a counselor, you can reach out to me to do some one-on-one work as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, Ryan Kopyar, this has been a distinct pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be here. And with that, folks, it is time for us to throw the bags back into the jalopy and head back out onto the Authenticity Road. So, on behalf of the show, I am Ator, and until we meet again, please be authentic. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope what you've heard will help you on the road to your personal authenticity.
Visit us at www.authenticityroad.online.